In today's episode, we're going to talk about intermittent fasting rules, both for the eating window and for the fasting window. So first, let's talk about why is it important to have rules. Now, if you're a rebel like me, you may kind of cringe at the idea of like, ooh, having rules. And I will say that what I found is rules are important. It's important to have some sort of idea of what you are doing. And it actually gives you a lot of freedom when you have set up rules for yourself, because then you know what you are committed to doing and what you are not committed to doing. And if you strike that right balance, because there is a balance that you have to find here, you don't want to have no rules at all, because no rules at all means you're not even doing intermittent fasting. You're not doing anything. But you do need to have enough rules so that you know how to act. But you don't want to get to the point where you have so many rules that you're feeling really restricted and you're resenting it. And it's confusing too, because you don't even really know what your rules are because there are just too many of them. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about the rules that I have had for myself because they've helped me to lose the weight and to keep it off. And what I've found over the course of time is that, you are in control. You have to always remind yourself that you're in control of this. No one else is. This is your plan. And it's helpful to give yourself some freedom and to avoid being too legalistic, because what you will find as you move through life, or at least this was true for me, there were certain rules that I had that in the beginning, yes, I could stick with no problem. But then life started to get in the way of my plan sometimes. And what I found was it was good to learn how to occasionally break the rule, or maybe better said, have a rule for breaking a rule. So just knowing, that when I'm talking about rules, I don't want you to ever get the impression that I'm saying, and I never broke this at all. Like I was good about keeping the rule, but there were times when I found it was good to break them. And that's something you find through trial and error. Everything that we're going to talk about today is all about trial and error, because what works for me may not work for you. You may have to do it a little bit differently. But the main thing is that you find that for yourself and that you don't give up. That you just keep working at it until you find it. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're setting up your rules for intermittent fasting is, what are you trying to accomplish? And for me, I wanted to lose weight and I wanted to then maintain my weight loss. And that is what I use intermittent fasting for. There are lots of other, benefits that some people talk about with intermittent fasting, but I'm not really interested in that. What I use it for is for weight loss. So the way I judge my rules, whether they are good rules or not helpful rules, is, are they helping me to accomplish that goal of weight loss? And depending on who you're listening to, they might be doing intermittent fasting for other reasons. Like they might be a lot more strict with the fasting window rules and maybe even the eating window rules, because they have certain goals in mind that are not just about weight loss, that maybe they're about, autophagy, things like that. But for my purposes, I was only interested in it for the weight loss. And that's the main reason I continue to be interested in it, for the weight loss maintenance. So first, let's talk about the fasting window rules. Now, for me, I had one big main rule, and that was no eating food during the fasting window. That sounds pretty straightforward, right? And it is. It's really straightforward. However, your mind starts to immediately think, but what about this? What about that? What about coffee? And this was actually a big thing for me, because in my beginning, kind of experiments with intermittent fasting, what I found was, when I tried to be too strict with the fasting window, meaning not allowing myself any coffee or anything like that, I hated it. I was like, I just totally don't like fasting because it's boring. But if I could have my coffee, I could fast. It was like no problem. I can do this fasting thing. I don't have to eat breakfast, but I need my coffee in the morning. And so again, because I wanted to do this for weight loss, I told myself, I'm going to try just having my coffee with half and half. I actually credit Martin Birkin. He was the guy that he had a blog called Lean Gains. And I learned about intermittent fasting through that blog. And he said, just kind of offhand in one post, like, if don't worry, go ahead and put a splash of cream in your coffee if that's what you need to get you through the window, something like that. And I thought, that's going to be my philosophy. I'm going to not worry about these small things. I'm not going to major in minor things. The big important thing is that I don't eat. And these littler things aren't going to be a big deal. And so the rule I made for myself was, okay, I'm going to allow myself to have coffee with half and half in it whenever I want it in the fasting window. That's my rule. And generally speaking, what that looked like for me, and what it continues to look like is 2 to 3 cups a day. Sometimes, it's going to be 4 cups, but, generally it's two to 3. And I like what I would call more than a splash in my coffee. And in the show notes, I'll link to my actual coffee with half and half. I have a post that shows you, okay, here's the color of my coffee if you're interested. Because I don't measure the half and half either. I want it to turn a certain color. The coffee needs to be a certain color, and that's how I do it. And so I knew measuring it would drive me crazy too. So I just said, okay, I'm going to have coffee with half and half whenever I want it. And that's my rule. And see, this is the nice thing about having rules, is that you can give yourself a rule that gives you freedom. And so it doesn't always have to be about restricting things. It can also be about giving yourself permission to do something. And having some variety in the fasting window, I think really has helped me. Things like, besides coffee, things like sparkling flavored water, and it's not sweetened. The kind that I use is it's not sweetened at all, like LaCroix. It just gives you a little something that's, nice. It's a little bit different, because fasting for long periods of time, day after day after day, can wear on you. It's just nice, and it's amazing how much just having a little something like that can really, brighten it up. Now, what about mints and gum and things like that? I never had a rule against it. I would, if my breath stank and I was out somewhere, I was like, oh, my breath stinks, I need a mint. I just didn't think about it as a thing that I need to worry about. I would have the mint. Or if it was somebody offers me a piece of gum, I'm going to have the piece of gum. I think the problem is, if you're pounding mints, and you're just eating hundreds of calories worth of mints, that's a problem. That's gonna mess with your results a little bit. Unless you decrease the amount of food in your eating window by that much. But generally speaking, a mint here or there, or a piece of gum here or there, it's just not going to move the needle. It's really, it's good to keep a big picture view of all this. And you might think, well, what about bites of food, just a single bite of something? And this is something I ran into because of cooking, because I would cook, I would be cooking and preparing a dinner, but it would be outside of my eating window. And I would think, well, oh, am I allowed to have, just a taste test? And I was really strict with myself in the beginning. I was like, no, I won't even have a taste, not even a little taste, because I was really trying to learn how to fast. But I loosened up over time, especially when I got into maintenance the first time. I was like, okay, I can loosen up on the whole not having a taste of something. But then when I went back and did my second bout of weight loss, I decided, look, if I'm in the fasting window and I'm cooking something and I need to taste it, I'm going to take a taste, and I'm not going to worry about it. Now, that can certainly lead to, and this is where the problem will start to come in. If that one bite leads to ooh, well, that's pretty good, let me take another bite. And then you just sit there and you're eating. And then basically you've eaten a whole serving or a whole meal's worth of food just by, tasting. So again, it's not something to fret about. The thing to pay attention to is, does that one bite then lead to lots of other bites? Now, I do have another rule in the fasting window, and this was the most helpful rule, the most helpful tip I ever got. And this came from Martin Birkin, and it was, do not sit around and brood about food. And that is really the key with intermittent fasting, is that you have to learn how to fill up your life with things other than food. Because fasting creates a vacuum, and something's got to fill that vacuum. And if you can't figure out what else to put in there, you'll go back to just using food to fill up that vacuum. So what I found really helpful was to have goals that I was working towards that I could do during the fasting window. So one thing I started doing in 2015 is I set a goal for myself to read a book a week. And I continue to do that. And I love having that goal. It keeps me busy during the fasting window. And it's something that I really enjoy. It's made my life so much better. And of course, if you've got some sort of step goal or some sort of exercise goal, the fasting window is a great time to do that. And also, once a week is a great idea during the fasting window to sit down and look at your numbers. Because, this is one of those things that is easy to do, but it's also easy not to do. And that's to sit down and look at your progress and make sure that you are making progress towards your goals. And it can feel like, oh, I don't have time for that. But when you have the fasting window, as long as you're obeying it, you will have some free time. Time that you normally spent eating will now be freed up for other things. And it's important to do that, to review your numbers. And just in general, staying busy, I would keep a list of things that I needed to do. That way I could remind myself like, okay, yeah, like I wanted to get this and this and this accomplished today. And that doesn't mean that you're always like running around during the fasting window. I don't want to give you that impression. It just means that it's a great time to do those things that you feel like right now you don't have time to do. One thing about all this is that fasting can make you face situations that you were avoiding by eating. So, like you may have stress in your life and that might get brought to the forefront. I mean, this has happened to me many different times where I'll realize like, oh yeah, I was using food to deal with my money stress, or, I was using food to like avoid this, having this conversation with my husband, or, whatever the thing is. So it's stressful dealing with these things, or it feels uncomfortable. But what I found was it was helpful that fasting kind of brought it to the forefront, because then you kind of had to deal with it. And so just know that there's probably going to be some uncomfortable stuff that you're going to have to face, but it's a big opportunity. It's really a good thing. And the more you can lean into that discomfort and face those situations, what I've found is the better life gets. So what I found is if you do that, if you just say, I'm going to stay busy and productive during the fasting window, then you really don't even have to deal with much hunger, because you're too busy to really think about, whether or not you're hungry. Now, the other part of dealing with hunger is to make sure you're eating enough during the eating window. So let's talk about the eating window rules. Now, the main rule for the eating window for me is that I can eat what I like. Now, I know that this goes against the grain from what a lot of people who do intermittent fasting say to do. Many people try to say like, well, you also have to do keto, or you really have to count calories. And what I found is that's not true. You can eat what you like and you can still lose weight. The main thing is that you just have to eat the right amount of food. So for me, nothing at all is off the menu. I can have dessert whenever I want it. I can have chips and wine and pasta, or, I can eat bread. I have no rules about what I can and cannot eat. The main rule I have for myself is that I don't overeat. Now, that might seem like, okay, great, just don't overeat. That's not quite as easy as you might think, because here's what I found. You can overeat and never feel overfull. So you could just be grazing all day, and in fact, you're eating way too many calories, but you never really feel like you're eating that many because you're just eating little bits here and there. But it's also not enough to just say, well, you should never feel overly full, because there are times when you may feel, uncomfortably full, but actually you've eaten the right amount of food as far as calories go. So some meals are kind of tricky because they have a lot of fiber maybe, and you might feel like, oh no, I overate, but actually you ate the right amount because the scale is doing what you wanted it to do. And that's how I always judge myself on that rule of not overeating. If the scale is going down, if I want it to be going down, or if it's staying the same when I want it to stay the same, then I think, okay, I'm not overeating. But if the scale is going up, that means I'm overeating. And so I have to look at, okay, like how much am I eating, and, decreasing that amount. Now, as a general rule, now this is not a hard and fast rule, but just kind of a general rule, I like to think in terms of having meals as opposed to snacks. My goal was, when the window opens, I'm going to eat food, and then I want that food that I eat to last me until my next meal. And so like if you're thinking about a 16-8, that's generally like lunch and then supper. And then what I would usually do also is I would have like a small something right before my window closed for the night, because I wanted the fasting window to feel easy the next day. Now, that's not to say that you can't have snacks, or like intermittent fasting is not going to work if you have snacks. That's not what I'm saying. What I found for myself though was in the fasting window, I would find myself feeling like I wanted a snack. Like I would be standing in front of the pantry, like it's in the middle of the morning. I'm not going to be eating right then, but I'm standing at the pantry looking for food. And I realized like, oh, actually, I'm not hungry. I'm stressed out right now because I'm upset about this certain situation. And so then that taught me that many times my desire to snack wasn't based on like, oh, I actually need this food in order to, help my body to function. It was just that this was a way to comfort myself. And so I'm always suspicious of myself when I want to snack. It's not to say that I never have a snack. It's just that I as a general rule, I don't eat a lot of snacks. Another thing that's really helpful about just sticking with meals as opposed to having snacks is that then it's easier to see the amount of food that you're eating. And so if you are having trouble, actually losing weight, it's easier to then say, okay, well, here's what I'm eating. And then to figure out, like, is that too much food? Now, you may be wondering, well, does that mean I need to count calories? And I tried counting calories with intermittent fasting. Back in 2015, I thought, okay, the weight loss wasn't happening fast enough for me. I was losing about 1 pound a week. And I thought, okay, I'm going to count calories. So what I did was I counted calories just at first, like just logging the food on my Fitbit app, just kind of, generally. And then I became obsessive about it. And what I ended up finding was that counting calories drove me crazy and I hated it. And I at one point said, okay, I'm not going to count calories. I'm just going to figure this out because, there was a time when people lost weight and they didn't even know like how many calories were in the foods. So my body can tell me, I can figure this out in some other way. And that's what I did. And I'm going to do a whole other episode about counting calories and my experience with that and what it actually taught me later on this season. But for right now, just know that you don't have to count calories in order to lose weight with intermittent fasting. You can just pay attention to the amounts that you're eating. So as you can see, I have just a minimal amount of rules. In the fasting window, the main rule is no eating and don't sit around and brood about food. And in the eating window, my main rule is eat whatever I like, but just not too much of it. And as a general rule, I just don't snack around. And of course, your rules may be different, but I would encourage you to write them down. I like the idea of trying to fit your rules just on a Post-it note. That kind of helps you keep them, short and to the point, and it limits you so that you're not just creating more and more and more rules for yourself, which will then end up being harder to stick with. And remember, do whatever works for you in your life. So I hope you found this episode helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Do you want to lose the weight without getting rid of the foods you love and that you'll go back to eating again anyway? My book, The Laid Back Guide to Intermittent Fasting, teaches you how to practice intermittent fasting so that you lose the weight sustainably and keep it off for good. You can get the audiobook read by me for free when you sign up for your 30-day trial of Audible. The link is in the show notes. And if you've gotten value from this podcast and you'd like to let other people know about it, it would be great if you could leave a review on either iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks.